Millionaire saw a Bobcat get into his car. When he found out why, he broke down in tears. Blake Harrington stood on the balcony of his Aspen mansion, surveying the vast property that had become his sanctuary. At 45, he had built a real estate empire that was the envy of his competitors. The crisp mountain air filled his lungs as he took a sip of his morning coffee, mentally preparing for another day of closing deals and expanding his fortune. The Rockies stretched before him, their majesty somewhat diminished by the blueprints. Spread across his desk inside, plans for his newest luxury resort that would soon replace a significant portion of the untouched wilderness visible from his balcony. The $500 million project would be the crown jewel of Harrington Developments, solidifying his legacy as one of the most successful developers in Colorado history. His phone buzzed with messages from investors and board members, all eager for updates on the groundbreaking ceremony scheduled for next month. Blake ignored them for now, savoring these few moments of solitude before diving into the chaos of his workday. His assistant Meredith would be arriving soon with his schedule and a stack of contracts requiring his signature. Blake was about to turn back inside when something caught his eye, a flash of movement near his garage. His security system should have alerted him to any intrusion. Frowning, he set down his coffee and made his way to his home office, pulling up the security feed on his tablet. The high-definition cameras captured a tawny creature moving cautiously across his property. Blake zoomed in, his brow furrowing as he recognized the distinctive tufted ears and bobtail of a bobcat. Wildlife sightings weren't uncommon in this part of Colorado, but they rarely ventured so close to residential properties, especially ones with state-of-the-art security systems designed to deter all manner of unwanted visitors. As Blake watched, the Wildcat approached his prized Ferrari, a limited edition model worth over $1 million, and to his astonishment, leapt gracefully through the partially open window. The Bobcat disappeared inside the vehicle, leaving Blake staring at the screen in disbelief. "What the hell?" he muttered, grabbing his phone and keys. He briefly considered calling animal control, but decided against it. This was his property, his car. He would handle it himself. How difficult could it be to scare off one wildcat? The garage was eerily quiet as Blake entered, the motion-sensing lights illuminating his collection of luxury vehicles. The Ferrari's cherry-red exterior gleamed under the recessed lighting, giving no indication of its wild occupant. Blake approached cautiously, peering through the window. A low, menacing growl stopped him in his tracks. The Bobcat was crouched. On the driver's seat, its amber eyes fixed on him with unmistakable hostility. But what truly shocked Blake wasn't the animal's presence. It was what lay behind it on the passenger seat. A tiny Bobcat kitten, barely larger than his hand, was curled up and trembling, its eyes not yet fully open. "Well, I'll be damned," Blake whispered, stepping back slowly. The mother Bobcat's growl intensified as she positioned herself more firmly between Blake and her offspring. The kitten was clearly in distress, its breathing shallow, its tiny frame showing signs of malnutrition. Blake retreated to a safe distance and pulled out his phone, searching quickly for wildlife rescue services. His first instinct was irritation. The Ferrari's interior would need complete restoration, but something about the mother's protective stance struck a chord deep within him. He recognized the fierce determination in those amber eyes, the willingness to face any threat to protect her young. 20 minutes later, his driveway was occupied by a white van marked Rocky Mountain Wildlife Rescue. Two specialists in khaki uniforms approached Blake with professional efficiency. "Mr. Harrington." "I'm Sarah Donovan, lead wildlife specialist," the taller woman introduced herself. "My colleague Jake will assist. You mentioned a bobcat with a kitten in your vehicle?" Blake nodded, leading them toward the garage. "I've never seen anything like it. The mother doesn't seem injured, but the kitten looks unwell." Sarah's expression grew serious. Bobcat populations have been struggling lately, especially with all the development in these mountains. Their natural habitats are shrinking rapidly. Blake felt a twinge of discomfort, thinking of the blueprints on his desk. "Will you be able to remove them safely?" "That's our goal," Sarah replied, studying the car and its occupants through the window. "The mother appears to be in decent condition but stressed. The kitten, however," she frowned, "severe dehydration, possibly malnourished. It needs immediate attention." Jake prepared a transport carrier, while Sarah explained their approach. "We'll need to sedate the mother briefly, just enough to safely transfer them both to our facility." The next hour unfolded with tense precision as the specialists worked to extract the wildcats from Blake's Ferrari. The mother growled and hissed throughout the process, her maternal instincts on full display despite her own evident exhaustion. When they finally succeeded in transferring both bobcats to separate carriers, Blake found himself inexplicably invested in their fate. "Will they survive?" he asked, watching the tiny kitten's labored breathing. Sarah met his gaze directly. The mother should recover quickly with proper care. The kitten, she hesitated. It's touch and go. These next 24 hours are critical. Before he could consider the implications of what he was about to offer, Blake heard himself say, "I want to cover all expenses for their care, whatever they need." Sarah looked surprised. "That's generous, Mr. Harrington. Wildlife rescue isn't exactly a glamorous charity for someone of your profile." Blake bristled slightly at her tone, but remained firm. "I can afford it, and I want updates on their condition. Daily updates." As the rescue team prepared to leave, Blake found himself following them out to their van, strangely reluctant to end his involvement. "Is there? Can I visit them?" Sarah's expression softened slightly. "We're not a zoo, Mr. Harrington, but given your contribution, I could arrange something once they're stabilized." She handed him a business card. "I'll call you tomorrow with an update." Blake watched the van disappear down his driveway, an unexpected weight settling in his chest. He returned to his office, the luxury resort blueprint still spread across his desk, but found his enthusiasm for the project had somehow diminished in the span of a single morning. His phone buzzed again, his project manager requesting confirmation of the environmental impact assessment submission deadline. Blake stared at the message, thinking of the desperate mother bobcat who had sought refuge in his garage, of the struggling kitten fighting for its life. For the first time in years, Blake Harrington found himself questioning the path he had chosen. He picked up his phone and made a call he never imagined making. "Dr. Donovan? This is Blake Harrington. About those bobcats. There's something else I'd like to discuss." ZD. 3 days had passed since the bobcats were removed from Blake's Ferrari. True to her word, Sarah Donovan had called with daily updates, her voice cautiously optimistic about the kitten's improving condition. The mother bobcat was healthy, aside from moderate exhaustion, but the little one had required intensive care for severe dehydration and malnutrition. Blake found himself distracted during board meetings, his thoughts drifting to the Wildlife Rescue Center rather than focusing on quarterly projections and development timelines. After canceling his afternoon appointments, he drove his range over along the winding mountain roads leading to the Rocky Mountain Wildlife Rescue Facility. The center was nothing like the polished corporate environments Blake typically frequented. The main building was a renovated ranch house surrounded by various outdoor enclosures and rehabilitation spaces. As he parked beside several modest vehicles, Blake felt oddly out of place. Sarah met him at the entrance, her expression suggesting mild surprise that he'd actually shown up. "Mr. Harrington, I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." "Please, call me Blake," he replied, suddenly feeling the weight of his designer suit and luxury watch in this rustic setting. "I had some unexpected free time and thought I'd check on our bobcat family personally." Sarah's slight smile acknowledged his effort. "They're not exactly our bobcats, but I appreciate your interest. Follow me." She led him through the facility, past enclosures housing injured eagles, rehabilitating foxes, and other wildlife patients. Blake noticed the dedicated staff working diligently with limited resources, a stark contrast to his corporate offices where no expense was spared on amenities. "We're keeping them isolated from our other rescues," Sarah explained as they approached a separate building. "The mother is still wild. We want to minimize human contact so she can eventually return to her natural habitat." Inside, a climate-controlled room housed 2 connected enclosures. In the larger space, the female bobcat paced restlessly, her powerful muscles moving fluidly beneath her spotted coat. In the smaller, more closely monitored area, the tiny kitten lay on a warming pad, looking marginally stronger than when Blake had last seen it. "He's responding well to treatment," Sarah said, noting Blake's concerned expression. "We've got him on a special formula, and he's gaining strength. Another week of intensive care, and he should be stable enough to reunite with his mother." "He?" Blake asked, moving closer to the observation window. "Yes, it's a male kitten, approximately 3 weeks old. We're estimating he was born in a litter of 3 or 4, but..." Sarah hesitated. "But what?" "Based on his condition and the mother's behavior, we believe he may be the only survivor of his litter. That would explain her extreme protective instincts and decision to seek shelter in your garage. She was desperate to save her last kitten." Blake felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. What happened to the others? Sarah's expression darkened. "Can't say for certain, but habitat loss is the most likely culprit. When natural territories are disrupted by development, predators are forced into unfamiliar areas. Food becomes scarce, shelter options limited. Many don't survive." The transition. The implied criticism wasn't lost on Blake. He thought of his luxury resort plans, of the 200 acres of wilderness that would soon be transformed into an exclusive playground for the wealthy. He'd never given much thought to the wildlife displaced by his projects. They were merely obstacles mentioned in environmental impact reports, problems to be solved with the right permits and political connections. "How long will they need to stay here?" he asked, watching the mother bobcat's vigilant gaze fixed on her kitten through the connecting window between their enclosures. "Once the kitten is stronger, we'll move them to our rehabilitation area for a few months. The goal is to eventually release them back into a suitable wilderness area." Sarah paused, studying Blake's face. Suitable wilderness is becoming increasingly difficult to find in this part of Colorado. Blake nodded absently, his mind racing with uncomfortable new thoughts. "The mother chose my garage, my car, out of all possible places to bring her kitten. Why?" "Bobcats are incredibly intelligent," Sarah explained. "Your property borders undeveloped forest land. She was likely already living nearby when her habitat was disturbed. Your partially open car window offered a secure, enclosed space, protected from predators and the elements. She made a calculated decision to save her kitten." A young veterinary technician approached with a clipboard. "Dr. Donovan, we need your signature on the medication adjustments for the eagle in Recovery Room 3. "Excuse me a moment," Sarah said, stepping away. Left alone with the bobcats, Blake found himself drawn to the observation window. The mother's amber eyes met his, and he was struck by the intelligence and determination in her gaze. There was no gratitude there, no acknowledgement of his generosity, only a fierce, uncompromising will to protect her offspring at any cost. Blake remembered his own childhood, growing up in a blue-collar neighborhood in Denver, watching his single mother work 3 jobs to keep them afloat after his father abandoned them. He recalled her exhaustion, her refusal to accept charity, her unwavering commitment to his future. Like this bobcat, she had done whatever was necessary to protect her young. Sarah returned, interrupting his reverie. "We're preparing for the afternoon feeding, if you'd like to observe." For the next hour, Blake watched the skilled team care for their wild patients. The dedication of the staff was evident in every gentle movement, every careful consideration. These people weren't building empires or amassing fortunes. They were preserving life with limited resources and unlimited compassion. "Your team is impressive," Blake commented as Sarah walked him back to the entrance. "How are you funded?" Sarah's laugh held little humor. "Barely, to be honest. We operate primarily on grants and donations. The state provides some funding, but it's never enough. Most of our equipment is second-hand, and everyone here works for much less than they could make elsewhere." Blake nodded, a plan forming in his mind. "I'd like to make a more substantial donation to your center, beyond covering the Bobcat's care." Sarah's expression remained carefully neutral. "That's generous, but I get the feeling there's something else on your mind." Blake hesitated, then decided on honesty. "There is. My company is developing a new resort about 20 miles from here. The environmental assessments are complete, permits secured. Construction is scheduled to begin next month." "I'm aware of the project," Sarah replied, her tone cooling noticeably. "Your Aspen Heights resort. It's going to eliminate one of the last major wildlife corridors in the region." Blake wasn't accustomed to such direct criticism. "The project is completely legal. We've met every requirement." "Meeting legal requirements doesn't make it right," Sarah interrupted. "Those requirements are already minimally restrictive thanks to developers' lobbying efforts." She sighed, visibly reining in her frustration. "I apologize for my tone, but I see the consequences of these developments every day." They reached the parking lot in uncomfortable silence. As Blake reached for his car door, Sarah spoke again, her voice softer. "That kitten in there, we call him Lucky, he represents thousands who don't make it. His mother's desperation drove her to seek help from the very species destroying her home. There's something profoundly tragic about that, don't you think?" Blake stood frozen, key in hand, as her words penetrated the carefully constructed walls. Around his conscience, the Bobcat had chosen his garage, his car, not because he was special, but because he represented her last desperate hope in a world that was increasingly hostile to her existence. A world he was actively helping to create. "What would happen," he asked slowly, "if the resort wasn't built?" Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "Theoretically, that land would remain one of the few viable wildlife corridors connecting the northern and southern wilderness areas. Dozens of species would maintain their natural migration patterns. Biodiversity would be preserved rather than further fragmented." Blake nodded, his mind racing with calculations, alternatives, and possibilities that had never before entered his consideration. "I'll be in touch, Dr. Donovan. Thank you for the tour." As he drove away, Blake's phone exploded with notifications, messages from investors, architects, his marketing team. The machine he had built was moving forward relentlessly. Thousands of people and millions of dollars aligned toward a singular vision of progress and profit. For the first time, Blake Harrington wondered if he had the courage to stop it. The Harrington Development's boardroom fell silent as Blake finished speaking. 12 faces stared back at him with expressions ranging from confusion to outright hostility. He had just proposed postponing their flagship project, the very development that had attracted over $300 million in investment capital. "Let me get this straight." Victor Pearson, his CFO and oldest friend, finally broke the silence. "You want to delay the Aspen Heights resort because of Bobcats?" The incredulity in his voice reflected the sentiment around the table. Blake maintained his composure, though his heart raced. 2 weeks had passed since his visit to the Wildlife Center, during which he'd immersed himself in research about habitat fragmentation, wildlife corridors, and sustainable development. The knowledge had transformed his perspective, but convincing. His board was proving more difficult than anticipated. "Not just Bobcats, Victor. The environmental impact is far more extensive than our initial assessments indicated. Blake clicked through slides displaying migration patterns, biodiversity statistics, and ecological forecasts. I'm proposing we commission a more comprehensive environmental study and explore alternative locations that won't disrupt critical wildlife corridors. Melissa Chen, head of marketing, scoffed. We've already launched the pre-sales campaign, 42 units sold in the first week alone. This market is red hot for this location precisely because of its unspoiled wilderness views. Unspoiled wilderness that won't exist once we build there, Blake countered. That's the paradox we're selling. Victor leaned forward, his expression hardening. Blake, you've built this company on identifying prime locations and transforming them into luxury experiences. It's what you do. It's what we all do. What's really going on here? Blake hesitated, knowing how it would sound. I've been consulting with wildlife experts. You mean that rescue center woman, Victor interrupted, the one who's been filling your head with environmental propaganda while you've been visiting stray cats? A flash of anger surged through Blake. Dr. Donovan is a respected ecologist with multiple published studies on habitat conservation. And they're not strays, they're native wildlife whose habitat we're systematically destroying. The room erupted in murmurs until Victor raised his hand for silence. Blake, may I speak with you privately? In Blake's office, Victor closed the door and turned to his friend with genuine concern. What's happening to you? 3 weeks ago, you were enthusiastically pushing to accelerate this project. Now you're talking like some tree-hugging activist. So, move to the window overlooking downtown Denver's skyline. I've had a wake-up call, Vic. We're building on one of the last functioning wildlife corridors in the region. Do you know what that means for species that depend on connected habitats? Victor sighed heavily. Blake, I've known you for 20 years. We started this company together in your garage with nothing but ambition and student loan debt. You've never cared about wildlife impact beyond meeting minimum legal requirements. Maybe that's the problem, Blake replied quietly. Maybe it's time I did care. This is about more than some Bobcat, isn't it? Victor studied his friend's face. Is this about your mother? Blake stiffened. Victor was the only person at the company who knew about Blake's origins, his childhood in poverty, his mother's struggle to provide for him as a single parent, her unwavering resolve despite overwhelming obstacles. Her passing from cancer 5 years ago had left wounds that Blake had buried himself in work to avoid confronting. This isn't about my mother, Blake insisted, though the parallel between the Bobcat's desperate protection of her kitten and his own mother's sacrifices hadn't escaped him. It's about recognizing that our actions have consequences beyond quarterly reports and profit margins. Victor approached, placing a hand on Blake's shoulder. Look, I get that you're having some kind of existential moment here, but you have responsibilities to your shareholders, your employees, your legacy. This project represents years of planning and millions in investment. You can't just walk away because you had an emotional reaction to a wildlife rescue. The words stung because they contained truth. Blake had built his empire on pragmatism and decisive action, not sentimentality. Yet something fundamental had shifted within him, a recognition that the values driving his success felt increasingly hollow. I'm not walking away, Blake clarified. I'm suggesting we reassess, find a different location, build something that enhances rather than destroys. Victor shook his head. The board won't support this. If you push it, they might move to replace you. Is that what you want? To lose control of everything you've built? Blake knew Victor wasn't exaggerating. Several board members had been pushing for more aggressive expansion, viewing Blake's leadership style as increasingly cautious. This sudden environmental concern would be seen as weakness, possibly even instability. Give me 2 weeks, Blake requested. I'll develop an alternative proposal. one that maintains our profitability while addressing the environmental concerns. Victor studied him for a long moment before nodding reluctantly. 2 weeks. But Blake, if this gets to the press, you pivoting from luxury developer to environmental crusader, it could create market instability. Keep it quiet until we have a solid plan. But keeping it quiet proved impossible. 3 days later, Blake was reviewing alternative site proposals when Melissa burst into his office without knocking. "Have you seen this?" She thrust her tablet in front of him, displaying a business news website with the headline, "Harrington Developments in Turmoil. CEO halts flagship project over wildlife concerns." Blake felt the blood drain from his face as he scanned the article, which detailed his visits to the Wildlife Center and quoted sources close to the board, expressing concern over his sudden change in corporate direction. "The stock is down 12% already," Melissa reported grimly. "Investors are panicking, and 3 major buyers have pulled out of their pre-construction contracts." Before Blake could respond, his phone rang with Victor's number. "The board has called an emergency meeting," Victor said without preamble. 3 o'clock today. They're voting on whether to continue with your leadership." The hours before the meeting passed in a blur of crisis management. Blake's assistant fielded calls from concerned investors, while his legal team prepared contingency plans. Through it all, Blake found himself thinking not of his company's stock price, but of the Bobcat kitten, now named Lucky, fighting for survival against all odds. At 2:30, Blake received a text from Sarah. "Lucky took his first steps today. Mother remains protective, but calm. Still a long road ahead, but hopeful." Attached was a short video of the wobbly kitten attempting to stand while his mother watched attentively. Something in the simple determination of the tiny creature steadied Blake's resolve. He made a decision and picked up his phone. "Dr. Donovan, Blake Harrington, I need your help preparing for a meeting. How quickly can you get to my office with your research on wildlife corridors and sustainable development alternatives?" Sarah arrived 45 minutes later, slightly breathless, and carrying a laptop and several flash drives. "I brought everything. I have, but I'm not sure how I can help with a corporate board meeting." Blake ushered her into his office, where maps and development plans covered every surface. "I'm fighting for more than a postponement now. I'm proposing we abandon the current site entirely and relocate to this alternative location." He pointed to a marked area on the map. "It's farther from the wildlife corridor, but still offers mountain views and access." Sarah studied the new location. "This would be significantly better ecologically speaking, but won't it impact your profit margins? The elevation is lower, the views less spectacular." "Yes," Blake acknowledged. "By about 22% according to our projections. But I'm hoping your data might help convince the board that the long-term benefits outweigh the short-term financial hit." Sarah looked genuinely surprised. "You're willing to sacrifice profit for environmental preservation. That's not what I expected from Blake Harrington." He met her gaze steadily. "Neither did I, but here we are." Together they prepared a presentation combining Sarah's ecological data with Blake's revised development plans. As 3 o'clock approached, Sarah gathered her materials to leave. "They won't let a wildlife researcher into their boardroom," Blake said. "But would you be willing to wait? Whatever happens in there, I'd like to discuss next steps afterward." Sarah nodded, studying him with new respect. "Good luck in there, Blake. For what it's worth, I think what you're doing is remarkably brave." Blake straightened his tie, tucked the presentation under his arm, and headed for the boardroom where his future, and possibly the future of countless wild creatures, would be decided. The board members barely acknowledged him as he entered. Victor sat at the far end, his expression grim. Blake recognized the atmosphere immediately. They had already made their decision. This meeting was a formality. "Before you begin," Blake announced, his voice stronger than he felt. "I'd like to present an alternative vision for the company, one that aligns profitability with responsibility." Chairman Reynolds cleared his throat. "Mr. Harrington, the purpose of this meeting is to vote on leadership continuity, not to discuss project modifications." Blake stood his ground. "You're concerned about my judgment. This presentation addresses those concerns directly. 20 minutes is all I ask." The chairman exchanged glances with other board members, then nodded curtly. 20 minutes. Blake took a deep breath and began to speak, knowing that everything he had built hung in the balance. 6 months had passed since the fateful board meeting that had altered the trajectory of Harrington developments forever. Blake stood at the edge of the construction site, watching as workers installed the final solar panels on the roof of what would become the main lodge of Harmony Heights, his company's first eco-conscious luxury resort. The project was rising. On the alternative site he had proposed, less pristine in terms of views, but strategically positioned to minimize environmental impact while still offering guests an authentic mountain experience. The resort's design incorporated sustainable materials, renewable energy systems, and native landscaping that would blend with the surrounding ecosystem rather than dominating it. "Quite a different vision from the original plans," Sarah remarked, joining him at the observation point. Their professional relationship had evolved into friendship over the months of collaboration, her expertise proving invaluable as Blake reimagined his company's approach to development. "Better," Blake replied simply. "Different, but better." The path to this moment had been anything but smooth. The board meeting had ended with a narrow vote in Blake's favor, 7-5, allowing him to maintain his position as CEO but with conditions. The company would proceed with his alternative plan, but if profitability targets weren't met within 2 years, he would step down voluntarily. Several board members had resigned in protest, including Melissa Chen, who departed with a scathing statement to the press about leadership being compromised by emotional decision-making. Victor had stayed, though their friendship remained strained by his perception that Blake had risked everything on an impulsive moral awakening. The public response had been unexpected. While some investors withdrew, others, particularly younger, more environmentally conscious ones, flocked to support what was being called the Harrington transformation. The company's stock, after an initial plunge, had stabilized and was now climbing steadily as the market responded to their new direction. "The wildlife corridor report came in yesterday," Sarah said, handing Blake a tablet displaying maps and statistics. "The bobcat population in the preserved area has increased by 12% since the original project was cancelled. Several endangered species have been documented using the passage between the northern and southern wilderness areas." Blake scrolled through the data with satisfaction. "And lucky? Any sightings?" Sarah smiled. "The tracking collar shows he's thriving. He and his mother were successfully released 4 months ago, and they've established a territory about 6 miles from here. He's growing fast, almost adult size now." A warm sense of accomplishment spread through Blake's chest. The Bobcat family that had catalyzed his transformation was free, wild, and flourishing, living proof that one decision could ripple outward with unexpected consequences. His phone vibrated with a notification. "The interview team from Sustainable Business Today is on their way up. Are you sure you don't want to join us? You're as much a part of this story as I am." Sarah shook her head. "This is your spotlight, Blake. I'm more comfortable behind the scenes. Besides, I've got a meeting with your R&D team about the wildlife monitoring system for the resort grounds." The wildlife monitoring system had been Sarah's idea, a network of non-invasive cameras and sensors that would allow guests to observe local wildlife without disturbing them. The data collected would simultaneously contribute to regional conservation research, transforming the resort into both a luxury destination and a living laboratory. "Mr. Harrington?" His assistant approached. "The journalists are set up in the model suite. They're ready when you are." Blake nodded, then turned back to Sarah. "Dinner next week? I want to discuss expanding the conservation easement on the western parcel." "I'd like that," she replied with a smile that suggested their connection might be evolving beyond the professional. The interview took place in what would become the resort's premier suite, a stunning space with floor-to-ceiling windows framing mountain views, though not the unobstructed vistas his original design had promised. The journalist, Emma Whitaker, was known for her incisive reporting on corporate sustainability initiatives. "Mr. Harrington," she began after preliminaries, "your shift from conventional luxury development to eco-conscious design has become a case study in corporate reinvention. What prompted this dramatic change in direction?" Blake considered his answer carefully. The full story, his emotional connection to a mother bobcat and her kitten, might seem trivial to some, too sentimental for a business publication. But authenticity had become his new North Star. "I had a moment of clarity," he began, "when I realized that success measured purely in financial terms was an incomplete equation. A mother bobcat seeking shelter for her kitten in my garage became an unexpected catalyst for re-evaluating what truly matters." Emma looked intrigued. "You're referring to the wildlife rescue incident that was briefly mentioned in earlier reports. How did that translate into restructuring your entire business model?" Blake described the experience, finding the bobcats in his Ferrari, visiting the rescue center, witnessing the struggle for survival that his development practices were exacerbating. As he spoke, he could see Emma's professional detachment giving way to genuine interest. "That kitten, Lucky, represented countless others affected by decisions I made from boardrooms without ever seeing the consequences. Once I understood, that connection, continuing on the same path, became impossible." Your investors weren't all supportive," Emma noted. "Your stock took a significant hit initially, and several high-profile board members departed. Do you regret the financial impact of your decision?" Blake gestured toward the construction site visible through the windows. "We're building something more valuable than what we originally planned, not just in moral terms, but increasingly in financial ones as well. Our pre-sales for Harmony Heights are outpacing projections by 17%, with a demographic we weren't previously reaching." "The conscious luxury market," Emma suggested. "Exactly. People who want extraordinary experiences without extraordinary harm. It's a growing segment we're now positioned to lead, while our competitors continue fighting increasingly stringent environmental regulations and public backlash." The interview continued for another hour, covering the technical innovations incorporated into the new resort, the conservation partnership with Rocky Mountain Wildlife Rescue, and Blake's vision for Harrington Development's future. As Emma was preparing to leave, she asked one final question. "You mentioned your mother briefly, a single parent who raised you in challenging circumstances. How did her influence shape your recent decisions?" The question caught Blake off guard. He rarely discussed his background, preferring to maintain the polished image of success rather than acknowledging his humble beginnings. But the journey of recent months had stripped away many of his old defenses. "My mother taught me about resilience and sacrifice," he said after a moment. "She gave everything to provide me with opportunities she never had. I see now that I translated her lessons into an endless pursuit of financial security without. Recognizing that true security isn't just about money, it's about creating something sustainable, something that leaves the world better rather than diminished." After the interview, Blake drove to the Wildlife Center, a trip that had become a regular part of his routine. The facility had changed dramatically since his first visit, expanded and modernized thanks to his foundation's substantial grant. New rehabilitation enclosures, research facilities, and educational spaces had transformed the modest operation into a state-of-the-art conservation center. Max Taylor, the center's new director, greeted him warmly. "Blake, perfect timing. The school group just arrived for their tour. Would you mind saying a few words about the partnership?" 30 middle schoolers gathered in the newly completed Education Pavilion, their curious faces turning toward Blake as he was introduced. These moments, connecting with the community that would inherit the consequences of today's decisions, had become among his most valued experiences. "5 years ago," he began, "I would have seen the land where you're standing as nothing but an investment opportunity. I would have calculated its value based on what could be built here, what could be extracted or exploited. I never considered what might be lost in the process." The students listened with surprising attention as Blake shared the story of Lucky and his mother, of habitat fragmentation and wildlife corridors, of how one encounter had sparked a transformation that continued to unfold in unexpected ways. "The most important thing I've learned," he concluded, "is that true success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you preserve, not just for yourself, but for all living things that share this planet with us." As the students dispersed to begin their tour, Blake's phone rang with Victor's number. Their relationship had gradually healed as Harmony Heights progressed and the financial projections improved. Victor had become, somewhat reluctantly, a convert to the new vision. "The investment group from Singapore is in," Victor announced without preamble. "They want to fund the entire wildlife corridor project, not just our portion. Their CEO was apparently moved by your feature in Sustainable Business Today." Blake felt a surge of satisfaction. The Wildlife Corridor initiative had expanded beyond Harrington Developments, becoming a collaborative effort between multiple landowners to preserve and restore connected habitats throughout the region. "That's excellent news, Vic. We're closing the funding gap faster than expected." "There's more," Victor continued, his voice betraying rare excitement. "The governor's office called. They're considering our proposal for state-level incentives for eco-conscious development. If it passes, Harmony Heights could become the template for a new generation of resorts throughout Colorado." As Blake ended the call, he found himself standing beside a large map of the region displayed in the center's main hall. Red lines marked the original wildlife corridors that had been fragmented by decades of development. Green overlays showed the restoration effort now underway, a network of protected lands that would allow animals to move freely once again. A small dot indicated the location where Lucky and his mother had been released. Blake touched it lightly, remembering the fierce determination in the mother Bobcat's eyes as she'd protected her kitten in his Ferrari, a moment that now seemed both distant and pivotal. Sarah joined him, following his gaze to the map. "Thinking about Lucky?" "About everything, really. How close we came to building on that critical habitat, how one small choice rippled outward." "Not such a small choice," Sarah corrected, linking her arm through his. "You risked everything. Your company, your reputation, your fortune." Blake shrugged. "It felt inevitable once I truly saw the consequences of what I was doing. Like I couldn't unlearn what I'd discovered." They walked outside to the observation deck overlooking the wilderness preserve that had once been slated for luxury condominiums. The late afternoon sun gilded the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. "I received an interesting proposal today," Sarah said casually. "The Environmental Sciences Department at Colorado State wants to document the Harmony Heights development process as a case study in sustainable corporate transformation. They're calling it the Harrington Model." Blake laughed softly. "The Harrington Model. I like that better than what the Wall Street Journal called it. Harrington's Folly." "History will prove them wrong," Sarah replied with conviction. "What you're building here isn't just a resort. It's a template for how development and conservation can coexist. how profit doesn't have to come at the expense of the planet. As the sun dipped lower, casting the mountains in amber light reminiscent of a certain bobcat's eyes, Blake felt a deep sense of peace. His empire hadn't collapsed as many had predicted. It had evolved into something more meaningful, more lasting. His legacy wouldn't be measured in buildings constructed, but in wilderness preserved, in balanced solutions rather than exploitative ones. There's an old saying, Blake mused, that we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it, from our children. I think I finally understand what that means. Sarah squeezed his hand gently. Lucky and his mother taught you well. They did, Blake agreed, and I intend to keep learning. In the distance, motion-activated cameras captured a tawny shape moving confidently through the underbrush. A male bobcat with distinctive markings, growing stronger each day in a habitat that would now remain his home for generations to come. Listeners, we hope Blake Harrington's transformation from ruthless developer to environmental pioneer has touched your heart. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about unexpected life changes and the wisdom found in nature's simplest moments. Find it by clicking the link to your left. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore life's complexities and the power of transformation. Don't miss our upcoming content, and please share your thoughts in the comments below. How has an unexpected encounter changed your perspective on what truly matters?